Welcome to NEMC TV6. My name is Terry Kozlarich, and I'm with the Focus program. And our focus today is in Memphis. We have a Civil War reenactment on this beautiful July morning. And what brings you to Memphis?
I'm part of the 5th Kentucky Volunteer Infantry Company, CSA, and we're here to try to help this event get started.
And who asked you to come?
I can't remember the gentleman's name now.
Is it the Memphis Historical Society?
Could be.
And you're here all day?
I am here all day. I'm the lone Confederate today.
You are the lone Confederate. And what infantry are you with?
The 5th Kentucky.
The 5th Kentucky. And do you do this all over?
All over the place. We go south, north, east, west.
You do? And you really enjoy this?
Yes, it's a great hobby. Great hobby. My son's in it with me, but he has to work today. There went the cannon.
And there goes the cannon. And welcome to Memphis. We're going to move along.
Normally a Confederate soldier march very, very light, so he may not have a backpack. Occasionally they do. Most of the time they would have a blanket roll that included the blanket and this waterproof blanket down underneath that's called a gum blanket. You'd have a small bag here called a haversack. I can pick that up. This is the bag that your rations would go in and all your eating utensils and stuff. So it gets pretty nasty inside. You'd have a small frying pan, pot, knife, fork, and spoon. A small bag called a housewife, which included sewing needles and thread and some patches so you could keep your uniform in good shape. We got issued soap. This is a little bit on the plate. There's a little bit of what I'd be issued, which is peanuts. We called them goober peas in the South, and parched corn.
Looks like Cocoa Puffs.
Yep. Next to it is a little bag, and it's got hardtack. That is what the Union guys would get issued. They'd be issued about 15 of those crackers every day, and they are what they call hardtack, and they are hard as a rock. Those guys, in order to eat them, would either crumble them up and fry them in their bacon grease, or they would dip them in their coffee.
Is it protein? Is that what it is?
It's just flour and water. Confederates got issued cornmeal because that's what we had down south. We got a lot of flour in the north. But the Union guys, and we'd capture those sometimes, we didn't really like eating them. Yet if you dipped them in your coffee, they were so old sometimes that the weevils would float off, and you'd have to skim the weevils off in order to drink your coffee.
Ew. Now that was the protein.
Yep. Like I said, he didn't march with a lot of stuff. You see, I got a pipe and a pocket knife and some shaving stuff in my Bible, of course. They'd play games occasionally. They'd make some homemade checkers, or they'd play dominoes, but that was when you had a little bit of a time to relax, which wasn't very often.
And where was the 5th Kentucky Infantry located?
They started out in eastern Kentucky, and it was kind of a divided border state, so there was Confederate or Kentuckians that were for the north, and there was Kentuckians for the south. So eventually the state got taken over, and Kentucky guys stayed in the war, but they became what they called orphans, which meant they couldn't be supplied from their home state. So we totally had to rely on the Confederate Army to supply us.
No food, no medical?
No, uniforms, things like that you got from the General Army, whereas states that still were in Confederate control were able to supply their soldiers from their states with more uniforms and other stuff. So we became what they called orphans. We fought all over the place, ended up surrendering outside of Appomattox too. So, anything else I can think of here?
Do you have family members that were actually in that infantry?
Yes, no, I do not. Some of the guys that I reenact with in this company do. Mm-hmm. They can trace their family back to it. Mine were all in Tennessee groups. I have 4 ancestors. One of them was actually a colonel, and he was, I would say he's fairly famous. He has plaques with his name on it at 3 different battlefields.
And do you have the same last name?
Yes, I do.
Well, why don't you go ahead and tell them what your name is?
My last name is Sugg, S-U-G-G. So I'm related to a gentleman called Colonel Cyrus Sugg. Mm-hmm. Colonel Sugg fought at Fort Donelson, and that's actually where General Grant became famous because we had to surrender there. He was sent to a prisoner of war camp in middle of Boston Harbor, stayed there for a while, and was exchanged along with his men. He reformed in Georgia, continued the war on. He came by train along with Longstreet to reinforce the battle at Chickamauga, and they got there just in time. Longstreet found out that there was a gap in the Confederate or the Federal lines that they didn't know was there. My ancestor was in charge of a regiment. His general got shot in the neck, and he had to assume command of the entire brigade. And at that point, they figured out this gap, and they broke through and basically won the battle there. So his name's on a plaque there as well. He was wounded 4 times going across one of the fields. He took a furlough, came back in time to go to the battle outside Chattanooga, where he became shot in the left knee on Missionary Ridge. There's a plaque there that says he got a mortal wound. He refused to have his leg amputated and died a month and a half later from the infection. But at the time he was trying to recover, letters were written to Jefferson Davis and were actually probably on Davis's desk from all the Confederate senators from Tennessee and all the officers of the 3rd Tennessee requesting he be promoted to brigadier general, but he died before that could be conferred. What I always tell people, look at the next generation. His sister named her first son after him. So her son was Cyrus Sugg Radford, and he became Quartermaster General Cyrus Sugg Radford, United States Marine Corps. He had a pretty distinguished career and actually received a Navy Cross from the president after World War I.
So there was some assimilation between the sides after the war.
Oh yeah,
your family.
If you look at a lot of the famous generals from the Confederate side,
and there we are again.
their children became officers and stuff up into World War I or World War II. And I think the highest ranking officer to die in the Pacific was a general who was the son of General Simon Bolivar Buckner. So they contributed.
So the Reconstruction did work, right?
Oh yeah,
the United States came back.
Yeah, they did. The next generation did great things.
Well, here we are, still back in 1863 by the Memphis Trail, and we've met up with
Reverend Peter Cartwright. I'm a Methodist Episcopal circuit rider. This area was on my circuit, so I thought I would stop, get off my horse, and have a service for the servicemen.
I see. And do you go from encampment to encampment?
This was part of it. I hit encampments once in a while, but my circuit is over 400 miles that I ride, and my horse is getting a bit worried.
Are you for the north or are you on the south?
I'm for God.
You are for God.
I preach to both the north and the south.
And you find yourself safe?
Aye. Pretty much for the soldiers, many of them are Christian, and many of them are ready to give their lives for what they believe is right. But it is not them that I fear. It is sometimes the more indistinguished people that I meet on the trail. There are pirates, there are robbers, and they have come close to me once in a while, but even though I am a minister, I sometimes prepare myself to defend myself. God will defend me from those He can, and I will defend myself from those who He sends in my path after I tell them about the Christ.
Because God helps those who helps Himself.
Amen.
This is really great. Here we are in Memphis, Michigan. It's 1863, and tell me a little bit about yourself.
The real self.
Your real self.
My name is Robert Chapman. I was born about 1.5 miles east of Memphis. I was born and raised on a farm. I graduated from Memphis High School in 1958. And God has led me many ways. I have served Him during Vietnam. I have become a school teacher. I became a minister and school teacher. I have been to Liberia, Africa on a mission trip to Liberia. That was very exciting going over there. There wasn't a building that we were in Liberia that wasn't full of holes from the Civil Wars. But it's been a very interesting life that God has chosen me.
So you're not too far out of character here?
Not too far, no.
Not too far. And it's really nice that you're doing this. And are you still from the Memphis area? Are you still around here?
I live outside of between Port Huron and Wadhams.
So you're still a little local.
Still a little local.
Yeah, a little bit larger of a city than it was way back yonder?
Not much larger, Memphis, no. But it is a fascinating little town to grow up in.
Well, thank you very much for spending some time with us and giving us an education about the Civil War and yourself.
My pleasure.
All right, we're going to move along. Hi, welcome to Memphis. What's your name, please?
Ron Clary, ma'am.
And Ron, what is your part in this reenactment?
Just portraying a Civil War infantryman from the 4th Michigan.
And do you do this all the time?
Yes, ma'am.
Tell me a little bit about your gun.
Actually, it's not a gun, ma'am. Popular misconception, it's a rifle. It's an 1863 Springfield. It's an actual rifle, fires a .58 caliber lead bullet, ma'am.
Lead slug, huh?
Yes, ma'am.
And do you have family that also participates in this reenactment?
Yeah, in this, well, not in this reenactment, no, ma'am. But realistically, all of us, we're all family.
You're all family, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And what brings you to Memphis today?
A friend of mine informed me a couple months ago, asked me if I could help out, drum up some interest for this event. I'm like, not a problem, I'll help out.
And tell me a little bit about your uniform.
Okay, this is a typical, early war uniform for the 4th Michigan, the frock coat. This comes in the north, obviously, it's blue and...
For our younger viewing audience who may not know.
This is a frock coat, obviously dark blue. And this is the standard kind of a jacket that a Civil War infantryman would have worn. I'm portraying a 2nd sergeant from Company A, the Smith Guards.
Well, thank you so much. And what's your name, sir?
Don Lum.
And Don, what is your participation here today?
Just helping out the event, bringing attention to it.
Tell me a little bit about your hat with the big E on the top there.
Well, the big E stands for
Company E.
yeah, Company.
Company E.
Company E, 17th Michigan.
Okay, and you also have family members that have been in the past wars?
Yes.
You do?
Yes, I did.
Is that where you got your interest from?
A lot of history, yeah. There was a lot of history taught in my house.
And was that the North or was that the South?
The North.
That was the North.
The North, yes.
Well, it's been nice speaking with you. And who do we have over here?
Hi, my name is Darlene Lum. I'm Don's wife, and I basically got involved because he was getting involved. But I've always loved history, and this sort of thing you can learn so much that you don't learn in the history books. Everyone has some aspect of the war that they're interested in. Mostly the men will focus on the military aspects, but they can tell you little details about battles and routes and their uniforms, etc., that you don't learn about in the history books. Myself, I usually portray a lady sitting in her parlor working on quilts, because during the Civil War they didn't have enough uniforms, tents, etc. when the war began, and so the families, to support their men in the military, as we do now, would send blankets and quilts and shirts and socks that they had made, whatever the men needed that the Army hadn't provided.
The fact that they could even get them to their men during that time, I mean, even it's not like it is today with the internet. How did they exactly know where they were?
The men would write letters.
Okay.
But also, in the beginning of the war, they didn't have what's called a sanitary commission. Also, they developed a Christian commission, and all of these were to help the men to distribute the supplies, they would have fairs to raise money for things that the soldiers might need. And the sanitary commission was out of Washington City. It wasn't considered Washington, D.C. at that time, but out of Washington City. And they sent to these commissions, Christian Commission, etc., these other community-based organizations, rules for what size to make the quilts, how the socks should be, how high up they should be, etc. And so that the people would then send all their products that they had made to the Sanitary Commission.
Okay, so one point of contact.
Exactly, and then they would make sure it was distributed to the soldiers. And in New York, I can't remember the name of this city, but there's a museum that actually has 3 quilts left that are stamped Sanitary Commission. But through the Sanitary Commission, they discovered that there were over 100,000 quilts distributed during the Civil War. That's just quilts, not mentioning all the other things that they made. So there was a very active public involvement.
So this was pretty much the women's role during the wartime?
Very much so, very much so, yeah. There are exceptions, but that was the primary thing, to support their soldiers.
Well, thank you so much for educating us.
Thank you.
Ready?
Hi, I'm Terry from Channel 6, and your name is?
Mike Martin. I live in Wales, Michigan, over here on Hill Road. And we're working on right now, this is a 12-pound mountain howitzer from the Civil War. And we're going to give you a little demonstration about firing in a couple seconds.
I've been hearing it all morning.
So that's pretty good then. And we'll see if we can knock that old tree down over there, if it'll fall down from the concussion. But
Hey, there you go. You know, I'm sure the people would appreciate it, right?
yeah, you bet.
Go ahead and give us a nice demonstration here.
This cannon can shoot cannonballs, can shoot shells. It can shoot the grape shot, where it's like, it looks just like a great big grape. And it can shoot canister, which canister rounds were like a big tin can full of musket balls. And they call them balls, but they're really bullets. and they'd stack them all in there, and then they would leave the muzzle about this far out. They would come apart, and they would kill infantry.
Kind of like shrapnel?
Yep, that's where the shrapnel came from. And what they do is this cannon is a 3-inch barrel, and what usually the process is, we have tools like this. This is the worm that every time after firing, you always have to put this in here, and it tries to pull out. At the time, they used to make their rounds out of cloth. We make ours out of aluminum foil, so we try and clean that out of there. Then you have a wet sponge, which is this one, and then we have a dry sponge, which is this one, and on the other end of the dry sponge is the rammer for putting the round hole.
Okay. So it went through a complete, what was the turnaround time from the loading, the shooting, and reloading?
Our time has to be like, we try and keep it between like about 3 minutes or more for safety measures, because all the time when you're doing this, you have to have a person cover the touch hole, because as you're pushing through with the dry mop, if there's any flame still in there, they'll still get fanned.
Okay.
And you have to get the oxygen out of there. So when it gets out of there and then you pull this out, it'll make a big thump. And I can give you an example how that does it. It kind of goes like this, and it'll come out like, sometimes it's supposed to make a thump, but it'll do it sometimes, and sometimes it doesn't. It used to make a pretty good thump, and what we do is we're all set to run it, and then we have another tool here. This is for piercing the round. It's basically just a piece of brass. You have to have brass, because if you have steel, it'll spark.
Okay.
And you don't want to spark around black powder. And then when they fire it, we fire it with what we have these friction primers.
Almost like flint?
And it's like, this is a little primer that's full of black powder, and it'll go right through the touch hole. And then when we're ready to fire, we'll hook a lanyard onto it, and the lanyard, the gunner will be pulling that round. And what we do is, in a couple of minutes, Bill and I will fire a round off for you so you can get a good film of it.
That would be great. Who maintains all of this equipment?
This gun is mine. I own it, and it stays in the barn over in Wales.
Yeah, so you are a true lover of the Civil War era.
Oh yes, it's a fun thing to shoot. We also belong in a unit called Bledsoe's Battery, which this gun's part of, but they also have a larger cannon that is it's a 6-pounder.
Yes, smoothbore 6-pounder, 1836.
Right, and this is Bill Wall. He's the commander of that gun crew.
Come on in, Bill. Give us a little information about yourself.
Hi, I'm Bill Wall.
Hi, how nice to meet you.
I'm the commanding officer of Bledsoe's Battery, which this gun is a part. Our second gun is a full-scale 6-pound smoothbore cannon made in 1836 in the Columbia Foundry in Columbia, Maryland.
Okay. And you also have a gun at home?
Well, it's not mine,
It's not yours?
but I service it and I crew it and I keep the crew coming and that kind of stuff.
You're making sure that it's safe when you're fired off?
Oh yes, we follow the, with a few exceptions, the same drill that both sides used during the rebellion.
Well, if you'd like to go ahead and give us a demonstration, we'd love to see how you load it, and we'll be all more than happy to see how it works.
All right.
I've been hearing it for the last few minutes here.
Oh, definitely. It does. We live to set off car alarms. I tell you, it's fun. It makes a lot of noise. It's fireworks horizontal. There's a little boy in each of us.
The G.I. Joe is alive and well.
The G.I. Joe is alive and well. The only difference between me at 6 and me at 63 is the size of my toys.
And the price of your toys.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Well, great. We're going to be happy to see a demonstration here.
The way this would happen is that the ammunition is kept in a box behind the piece. Is our ammunition box. Now, as I said, during the rebellion, these rounds would be wrapped in cloth because cloth would burn more clearly. We use aluminum foil as a safety feature so that our people can ram it home and get their hands out before the gun prematurely explodes. We ready?
Just about. Okay.
Normally this gun would have a crew of 4. It would be commanded by a sergeant. 2 guns would make a section commanded by a lieutenant. 6 guns would make a battery commanded by a captain. What would happen is when on command by the commander, a round would come forward It would be placed into the tube as thusly. It would then be rammed home by the rammer. Count. We would wait 10 seconds so that in case it went off accidentally, our person's hand wasn't caught. One final tap, and we're done. No, don't put it back in. Then we would return to the back of the piece. We would prick open the bag. It looks like an ice pick from the 1930s, and its purpose was the original rounds were wrapped in canvas. So then he's going to have to move. So when the bag would be open, exposed to the powder, there is in this is called a friction primer. I don't know if you can see it. It's a tube of brass containing fulminated mercury and gunpowder with beeswax at both ends. When the wire is pulled, a spark is created inside the powder that sends a flame down into the open bag, which then explodes, as we will demonstrate.
Okay.